In my last video, I said that the most liked comment would be the deck I would play next. You all picked a list that I wasn't expecting. Legacy Minotaurs. I couldn't really find much about this deck online recently, so I had to take a list from Bosch & Roll made about 7 months ago. The main game plan of this deck revolves around Didgeridoo. This is a 1-mana artifact where you can pay 3 to put a Minotaur into play from your hand. The first Minotaur we play alongside it is Neheb, a 5/4 trample which lets us loot dead cards from our hand and ramps when it connects. To go wide, we play Sethron, which makes 2/3 bodies and can give all of our creatures menace and +1/+0 for 3 mana. The main combo Minotaur is Morog, used to take extra combat steps by playing our lands. You can get a lot of extra turns too if you're using your fetch lands in that turn. Finally, we play Boros Battleshaper. While it may look weak, it is very powerful at preventing attacks and blocks from the opponent because it triggers at each combat. To finish off the deck, we play a load of good spells to help us get there when we need to smooth our draws, and we play Urza Saga in the mana base so we have extra ways to find the Didgeridoo. To start off the first round, we're on the play and we have a very interesting hand. We have the Didgeridoo, 3 Minotaurs, a Brainstorm, Force of Will, and 1 land. I end up deciding to keep this because my logic is this: in Legacy, you typically don't have to Force of Will on turn 1 unless the opponent is on a combo deck. So I can cast the Didgeridoo turn 1 and then Brainstorm on the next turn if we don't top deck a land. Things don't look too good when the opponent plays 2 Chrome Mox, a City of Traders, and a Caves of Chaos Adventure. This is really bad for me because I can't present a blocker for this card and the initiative trigger will run away with the game, so I'm actually forced to use Force of Will and have to pray that we can rip lands off the top of the deck. This really isn't looking good for us. Like absolute beasts, we rip Ancient Tomb off the top of the deck, so we now have 3 mana to activate Didgeridoo. Wow, what insane luck, we really needed that. The opponent just plays an Unlicensed Terse and passes back the turn. On their end step, we use 3 mana to activate Didgeridoo to put Sethron into play because we're looking to go wide. We untap, we draw Force of Will. That doesn't have much use to us, but we want to violin the other Morag because it pumps attacking creatures. Our Sethron makes another 2/3 because of its Enter the Battlefield ability, and we attack in for 8. The opponent untaps and just scoops up the game. Boarding in this matchup, I decided to not make any changes because there wasn't high impact cards in the sideboard that I wanted. Our opening hand for game 2 though is perfect. We have the Didgeridoo, we have a load of mana, and we have Brainstorm to shuffle away cards that we don't want. Things aren't looking too great though when the opponent leads with an Ancient Tomb and a Chalice on 1. I probably should have boarded in Hurkyl's Recall, or even changed the sideboard to have cards like a Braid because I did change Bosch & Roll's list because it was from 7 months ago. I decide not to cast the Chrome Mox because I'm scared of cards like a Braid and Fiery Conflicts from the opponent, but they punish me by untapping and casting a Trinisphere. Things start to look better when we find an Urza Saga. That will eventually get us a Didgeridoo, but the mono-red opponent has the Blood Moon, so now the game just becomes a nightmare. I'm going to fast forward a bit because this game goes really slow, but I want to highlight this specific point, where I can hardcast Chrome Mox or hold up Force of Will. My logic is this: my opponent is mana screwed, so I'm going to hardcast the Chrome Mox and hope they don't top deck a land, and it's down to what card do I pitch. If I pitch the Brainstorm, then I need to hope to draw a blue card to pitch the Force of Will, or I can pitch one of the Minotaurs and still have Force of Will as an option on the next turn. I can't pitch the Didgeridoo because of the way Chrome Mox is worded. So I decide to pitch the Minotaur, and this evidently insanely punishes me because I draw lands and uncastables for the rest of the game. A really unfortunate game. I think this is the Magic Gods telling us that, look, you can top deck the Ancient Tomb in game 1, but I ain't giving you free wins in game 2. Going into the third game, I brought in the Hurkyl's Recall and took out the Brainstorms because they're bad against Blood Moon and Chalice on 1, and we have a really nice hand for game 3. Yet again, we got a Chrome Mox, Didgeridoo, and a load of Minotaurs. We start the game with Chrome Mox and Didgeridoo. They play Chalice on 1, that doesn't matter, we have 3 mana and can say go. On their turn, they miss their second land, and we can now put Neheb into play to put a ton of pressure on them. Neheb is a great card to put on the board here because it lets us loot away unwanted cards. We do just that, we attack in for 5, discard the Scalding Tarn, we find a Retrofitter Foundry, we can't cast it though because of the Chalice. On their turn, they don't have their second land, but they do have a Fury which will deal 4 damage to the Neheb, putting it to the graveyard. Very unfortunate, but we still have a 5/5 to put into play, as well as a Hurkyl's Recall to get this Retrofitter Foundry down if we need extra pressure. We top deck an island which isn't too useful, so what I decide to do is attack in for 5, use Hurkyl's Recall to bounce the Chalice, and put the Retrofitter Foundry on the table because I want to use my extra mana to make tokens. On their turn, they find their mountain, they can play Fable of the Mirror Breaker, we top deck a Didgeridoo, attack in for 5, putting him to 1, making this Ancient Tomb useless. They weren't able to block, and they aren't going to be able to attack because of the triggered ability of our Minotaur. They loot a Goblin Rabblemaster and a Chalice to the Fable of the Mirror Breaker Chapter 2. Now we're going to see what they're going to do with just 1 red mana, as don't forget they've missed a lot of land drops. They try to attack, but that doesn't work because of our Minotaur. They play a City of Traders, and they exile Simian Spirit Guide to cast Fiery Confluence to destroy my Retrofit of Foundry, my Didgeridoo, and deal 1 damage to each creature. This is fine because they're still at 1 life. Yeah, that's not too good for us. I'm going to be honest, for the rest of the game we got really unlucky, and if you look at the opponent's side of the board, they only drew 3 lands all game, and we didn't draw too well. Unfortunate, it happens, but yeah, I don't know. Did I make any punts in this game? Let me know in the comments. Starting the next round, we're on the play, and we have an ideal hand. While this looks weak at first, what we can do is play Urza's Saga turn 1. This means that turn 3 we can float mana with Urza's Saga, then we'll have 2 lands in play and we can pay 2 so that we can activate Didgeridoo in play that we can fetch from the Urza's Saga. I think it's a decent keep, especially in the blind. The opponent leads with a Bloodstained Mire, they fetch a basic Swamp, and start off with a Grief. This Grief takes the Shark Typhoon, which is an interesting choice, but then it starts to make sense when they cast Dark Ritual, Entomb, and then cast Exhume. Yeah, I think this kind of sums up how my life is going right now. There is a small and very small chance I can win this game. I'm talking so small, it's smaller than the value of the Hasbro stock. Because I top deck a Boros Battle Shaper, I could have technically locked up the Gristlebrand, but because they can just reanimate other creatures, I lost the game. Going into boarding, we want the Surgicals, the Flusterstorms, the Soulguide Lantern to all interact with the graveyard, and we want to take out these slow spells. Sathron is the worst Minotaur because going wide doesn't help against their deck too much. Obviously it stops the Archon, but we want ways to stop the Archon getting into play as well as the Gristlebrand. We had to mulligan a really bad 7, we have to mulligan a no land 6, and the 5 is not too bad to be honest. We have 2 Surgical Extraction, we have a Standstill, an Urza's Saga, and a basic island, so as long as they don't have multiple discard spells and they just go all in on the reanimation, this hand can easily win. We start with the basic island, we ship it back, and they lead the turn with the Grief. That Grief takes a Surgical Extraction from our hand. And then they have a Thoughtseize. Okay. They follow up with a Lotus Petal, they cast a Faithless Looting and discard some bombs. We top deck an island so we can only play Standstill and say go and hope we top deck a Force of Will if they cast a Reanimation spell. They do have Reanimate on the Gristlebrand. Can we top deck a Force of Will? Are you kidding me, game? Wow. And I think you can all see where this game goes. They go down to 3 life with Gristlebrand, use a Lotus Petal and a land to cast a Serenity, which will destroy my Urza's Saga. We top deck another land just to add insult to injury, and we lose. Going into the 3rd round on the draw, we start off with the terrible luck we've had so far in this video, but don't worry, that won't affect this game because we have a very nice Didgeridoo Standstill hand. The opponent starts off with a Dragon Rage Channeler and a Mishra's Bauble, and the funny thing is they look at my top card and they have a big pause because they realize that our Minotaurs, because we rip a big Minotaur off the top, and what's even better is our Didgeridoo actually resolves against Delver turn 1 hype. The opponent does Delver things, they cast a Ponder, and then interestingly, they cast a Nimble Mongoose, something that we don't see in Legacy often. But YouTube commenters, I need your help. Please give me your energy by smashing that like button so we can rip something off the top of the deck to help here. You clearly all channeled your Delver hate into that like button because we rip an Ancient Tomb off the top of the deck. That lets us disrupt the opponent immensely here, so let's play that, say go, and just start viling in some Minotaurs. The opponent untaps, casts an Expressive Iteration, gets a Wasteland, use it on the tomb, and I put the Mirage into play because the Dragon Rage Channeler is attacking every turn anyways, and the Nimble Mongoose has Shroud. Now I actually get very confused on how this trigger actually works, and if it matters if I play the land before or after combat. Now I have no clue why I play the land before combat, but it ends up not working. This trigger was really confusing, and yeah, I'm just dumb. They end up playing another Nimble Mongoose, and I actually managed to make them chump it, and because we can just hit our land drop every turn, I end up getting the Boros Battle Shaper down, and it wins us the game. We get in for 5, they can't block, and they lose, and going into boarding, we want all the counterspells in, and we want to take out the Force of Wills as card disadvantage is bad, and the Retrofit of Foundry is a bit slow. In game 2, we keep a hand that's somewhat risky as it doesn't play around Wasteland, but the Delver player isn't always going to have Wasteland. However, in this case, they did have it, meaning our hand was too slow and they just overloaded the board with 3 3s. If they didn't have that extra Dragon Rage Channeler, we could have potentially had a chance, because we could have used Ancient Tomb this turn to activate Didgeridoo, but they lock things up when they cast a Minskimbu. In game 3, they have a very disrupted hand with Brazen Borrower and Meltdown to slow my hand down, get a Minskimbu and a Murktide Regent down, which is looking pretty bad, But if you look at this board, I actually have lethal. I can make a construct here, and if I can top deck a land, then I'll have exactly enough mana to activate Didgeridoo twice to make both creatures not block. Would you look at that? That's a volcanic island. I can now get my Didgeridoo, my construct becomes a 2/2. That's 4 power on the board. I can put both Boros Battle Shapers into play, then make the token can't block, make the Murktide can't block, and bash in. After this, I couldn't take the deck anymore, so I had to drop. Hope you guys all enjoyed. Check out this video because YouTube thinks you'll like it, and I'll see some of you in Bulgaria this weekend for the RC Finals.